Welcome to the fourth of 5 videos from the Roman Army Lecture, the UofW 2021 on the enemies. And in this fourth video, I'm going to say a little bit about the Sasanians, Roman, Sasanian, Orion, their complicated relationship. And in this case, this means going to late antiquity, and so the next video as well on the Huns. And this enemy is the closest Rome got to an equal, at least from their perspective, an equal partner. But sometimes they were the less equal partner, sometimes they were the more equal partner. Okay, so get rid of this, and hopefully someday I'll offer a course in Sasanians, but we'll see. Right, Sasanian, Sasanid, Persia. So there had been some sort of kingdom empire in more or less Iran and beyond for many centuries. Of course, one of the most famous are the Achaemenids, the ones who invaded Greece at the very beginning of the 5th century BCE. But they were followed when they were conquered by Alexander the Great, by the Seleucids, sort of one of Alexander's sort of successor kingdoms. And they, in turn, were followed by the Parthians, who had, a long and complicated relationship with Rome. They're the ones who killed Crassus in 53 BCE in Carrhae. But eventually, Rome got the upper hand against the Parthians, and that ruling dynasty was replaced by the Sasanians. And this all took place in the early 3rd century, or first third of the 3rd century CE. So we can see that Rome abutted the Iranian Sassanid frontier, more or less here. So this is like Turkey over here. Okay, we're heading down into like Syria, etc. So here is much of modern day Iraq. Okay, Kuwait down here, and here's sort of Iran and Turkey sort of spilling over here, and various other countries as well. So the frontier, this large sort of zone running between the two in the east, sort of the eastern limit of Roman control and the western limit of Persian control. Here you can see the relative size of the two parties, with some fluctuations. We have sort of a unified Roman Empire in late antiquity with all these colors, and then a massive Persian Empire, Sasanian Empire, you can see here, stretching from Turkey all the way into Afghanistan and various parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, now we have, the evidence for them is kind of interesting too. I'd say a little bit about it because I really like late antiquity, like the Persians, there's a lot of good stuff. So as I said, this Sasanian dynasty overthrew the previous Arsacids, the Parthians, and they, at least from a Roman perspective, and there's a great new book, which I've only read some of, the last, is it Empire, Kingdom of Iran by Michael Bonner, describes it in the political and military history. But one of the main takes is that people have is that the Sasanians had much more military success against Rome, and they had a more expansionist policy as well, and they also maybe were keen on, in part based on some of the evidence we have for them, which are these reliefs and inscriptions, Tekinishtan and Rustan and Nash Rajab, these reliefs which suggest they wanted to conquer some of the territory lost to Alexander the Great. Maybe this is a bit of propaganda, but to show you what that would mean expanding into this territory, which was occupied by Rome. And they had a lot of wars between them, and in the late 500s, very end of the 500s into the 600s, the 6th into the 7th century, they did manage to take over much of this territory for a decade or two. So the sources are very complex. There are still a lot of like Greco-Roman ones, Roman views of a foe. We get digressions in assorted late Roman historians. So one of the most important ones, and you read a bit about this, is Ammianus Marcellinus, the Res Gestae of the 4th century. Flash forward 2 centuries later, we get Procopius in his wars, talks a lot about Persians. The first 2 of his 8-book work is on wars with Persia, and the 8th book includes stuff as well. Agathias, who talks about things just after Procopius. This is mid 6th century CE. Also talks about Persians and has some digressions, and Theophilus Semicatta talks about things like that as well. So they're writing the same tradition as earlier ones, okay, with all these digressions on non-Roman people. Now, the difference is that the Persians are quite different. So they're not quite like where Judeans were subjugated people living within the Roman Empire who rose up, and the Gauls were people who were conquered by Rome. The Persians were their neighbor, and they were as I've said, a large, politically pretty stable and powerful people in their own right. So one of the remarkable things about the relationship, I said, sort of mentioned the thing about equals. There's this view that they were the two eyes of the earth, and two superpowers, like in the Cold War, we had, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and here we have the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Iran. Okay, so two quite equal powers, and quite often the Persians got the better of all this. So we have these. So we don't quite get this characterization of them as barbarians in the same way that other people are characterized. There is some, hostility in some things, but the Romans kind of realize that they're not in the same league as some of the other ones. Now we also do have a lot of Persian sources and assorted other ones. There's sources in Armenian and sources in Syriac, sort of languages used, sort of, the frontier between the two places. There are later Arabic sources that copied now lost Persian sources, at least as far as texts go. There's the Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, this epic of the kings, talked a lot about Persian stuff. Some of it is usable, and it said that there's an Arabic one. Al-Tabari is one example. And there's a lot of material evidence. And I want to show you, just to give you hints of some of this. So here's some of the reliefs. Persian kings. We get, there are also some amazing archaeological remains as well. So just as the Hadrian's Wall over in Britain, built by the Romans, there's the Great Wall of Gorgan sort of running through Central Asia. You can see the outline parts of it here. So it's been excavated, subject of those are major publications, and there's been work on the forts and fortifications along these too. There's a lot of work on Roman forts and fortifications, but there's an increasing number on these as well. Now, this wall and these forts are not facing Rome, which tells you a lot about Sasanian, Persia, and Iran as well. So not only, this wasn't like Rome was the only issue that they were concerned with. They had other neighbors that were equally a matter of concern too. And it's kind of interesting that they approached this issue in the same way. So this wall, it's kind of like up here. There's the Black Sea, and here's the Caspian Sea. So here's the Black Sea, the Caspian. It's sort of like more or less up here. So it doesn't face Rome. It faces sort of. They're more concerned with steppe people. It's about like the Huns that we'll get to next. Okay, so we have this great wall. There you can see it with a bit like Hadrian's Wall, with little forts attached to it, and the outline of what's left running through that part of the Caucasus. Okay, the Red Snake is one name for it. And here is some more stuff with little fortlets and so on. So it's and there's a bit of the wall you can see as well. So varied terrain and quite a remarkable thing. Another good example of the, as I said, material remains. Here the visual remains. I talked about, where is it here? The rock reliefs at Nakish Rustam and Nakshi Rajab. I'm probably mispronouncing them horribly. Though these are some remarkably detailed things, including one with possibly with Shapur I, one of the Persian kings, and possibly Valerian, and also maybe Philip the Arab, two Roman emperors who were bettered by the Persians. Now, we also get Shapur left behind a res gestae. So remember, Augustus has res gestae, which is his list of accomplishments. Shapur has one too. It's in a couple of 2 or 3 languages, and he talks about his accomplishments, all these people he subjugated, and so on and so forth. We get remarkable, some amazing silver plates, often hunting scenes, some sort of warrior scenes, and often depicting, say, the emperor or Shah on horseback or on the back of a camel hunting with a bow and arrow. Now, there are all sorts of interesting, as I said, conflicts between the two. The course theory only goes to the 476 or so. A lot of them took place in the 3rd century, and Persia usually got the better of the Romans in this case. Here's that other relief, possibly with Philip or Valerian and Philip the Arab. So the Sasanians overthrow the Arsacids, go off on a sort of a major period of expansion, aggressive towards Rome in the west, possibly going back to earlier Achaemenid views, and make serious inroads into Roman territory. So Dura Europus, which we have talked about a few times, will come up again. This is a well-preserved city, more or less on the frontier with Persia, was sacked by the Persians and is fairly well preserved. And we have this, good evidence of both Persians but also Romans who participated in that conflict. We don't really know about the sack in the text. We only know about it in the archaeology. Perhaps even more famous, if much less better documented event, was the Battle of Edessa in 260 CE. In fact, I just watched a little Total War video someone put together on it. And it's significant because, an unprecedented event happened. Valerian, the Roman emperor at the time, was captured and killed by the Persians in this battle. Marked a low point in their relationship with Iran. So this sort of idea that Rome had been superior to the Parthians is sort of gone, obviously, when your emperor is being killed by them. The Romans do end up, faring better later in the 3rd century. Of course, like any Iran, like any kingdom empire, same with Rome, of course, they have good periods and bad periods. Political power waxes and wanes, and of course, they have problems from other frontiers as well. So after a lot of success, sort of the middle of the 3rd century against Rome, as we get to late 3rd century, Rome gets the initiative. The 4th century, there's some back and forth until the Emperor Julian decides, I'm going to go invade Persia, and it doesn't go very well. And then there's some relative stability, maybe except outside the 420s, until the end of the 5th century, when things start to pick up between the two, and they have a whole series of conflicts. In the 6th century, off and on, long wars, endless peaces, etc., before something called the Last Great War of Antiquity between Rome and Persia, epic conflict which results in Roman victory and then is immediately followed by the Arab conquest. Anyway, so here we have Iranian Persia. I don't have anything else to say with them because it's just meant to be short and sweet. But yeah, so quite a different foe, massive resources, large armies, famed for their cavalry especially, but could amass large numbers of infantry, although some say that maybe they weren't quite as good as Roman infantry, but maybe their cavalry was better, and archery a thing too. They were very skilled at siege warfare, as the sack of Dura Europus shows. And if you find that YouTube video of the Battle of Edessa in 260 with Total War, siege towers and various artillery brought up to the walls of Edessa, this Roman city, and off they go. So that's it. That's it for this 4th video.